Hello, and welcome to the annual WriteHive conference. This year is packed with a ton of great sessions for writers, writing professionals, and the publishing industry. WriteHive is a nonprofit serving the writing community with free and inclusive resources, events, programming, connections, and more. The 2024 conference brings you this session, Marginalization and the Querying Process. Today, we have 4 awesome panelists, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. We have Keir Alekseii. Keir Aleksei's career started as Jen Azantian's mentee in 2021 at Azantian Literary Agency. After a year of mentorship, she became an associate agent with Azantian and began taking on clients in July 2022. She is an educator and anti-GBV activist born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, a twin island country in the West Indies. Keir is a writer, gamer, lover of folklore, and former research scientist. As a neurodivergent queer person of color, Keir is invested in discovering engaging work with similar representation and passionate about creating space for voices often not recognized. They are especially interested in stories from BIPOC who are born and raised in the global South. Keir still lives in TNT with their partner and 5 rambunctious felines who believe they are the best thing on Twitter because they are.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that lovely intro, Adria.
You're welcome. Up next, I have Lauren Davila. Lauren T. Davila is a Pushcart-nominated Latina author, anthropologist, and editor. She has edited multiple short story anthologies, including As We Convene, an anthology of time and place, inked in Gray Press, June 2024. To Root Somewhere Beautiful, an anthology of reclamation, Outland Entertainment, March 2024. When Other People Saw Us, They Saw the Dead, Haunt Publishing, May 2022, Outland Entertainment, May 2023. Her poetry and short fiction has appeared online at Granada Magazine, The Paragon Journal, Ghost Heart Literary Magazine, Peach Velvet Mag, Voyage Journal, Second Chance Magazine, Headcanon Magazine, In Parentheses, and Poets Reading the News. She is currently editing her debut adult novel, as well as working on poetry and short story collections. Lauren has an MA in English from Claremont Graduate University and MFA in fiction writing from George Mason University. Besides her personal creative work, she is the acquisitions editor at Inked in Gray Press and is actively acquiring genre fiction from historically marginalized writers. She is the assistant director at Pocket MFA, an online writing and mentorship program. She lives in the greater Los Angeles area, where you can find her swimming, walking her golden retriever, and drinking one too many lattes. She is represented by Susan Velasquez Coleman at Jabberwocky Literary Agency.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
All right, up next we have Patchree Jones. Patchree Jones is a Thai-American author and currently lives in Southern California with her husband, 2 children, and 1 lazy dog. She has always enjoyed reading and consuming all kinds of stories throughout her entire life. As a girl, she grew up watching Thai dramas with her mom and dreamt of being a playwright as a teen. While life took her on a different path, her love of stories never faltered. Patchree believes that everyone has a story to tell, and we are all the stars of our own narratives. It takes a fighter to share their vision with the world, and Patchree hopes to blaze the trail for all children to go after their dreams unapologetically. When she is not planning new stories in her head, she is usually reading, binge-watching her favorite anime and Asian dramas, or vibing to her Thai pop playlists. As a debut author, she believes that writing is not for the faint of heart, but every story is written 1 word at a time. Her forthcoming middle-grade novel, Skylight, will be her debut work of fiction and is slated for publication on June 25th, 2024 with Sora Books.
Hello, so happy to be here.
And finally, we have Salinee Goldenberg. Salinee Goldenberg is a speculative fiction writer and multimedia artist who lives in Washington, D.C., and is drawn to outsider perspectives. Her debut fantasy novel, The Last Phi Hunter, will be published by Angry Robot in 2024. A biracial, bisexual diaspora writer, Sal often explores themes of identity, obsession, and alienation in her work. A gaming industry veteran, Sal has created narrative trailers for titles such as Skyrim, Fallout 4, Dishonored, and Minecraft. When not writing, she likes to paint, listen to records, and play in punk bands. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
All right. I'm very excited about this panel. We are going to discuss marginalization in the querying process, and I can't wait to hear what you all have to say about it. So let's go ahead and get started with some very basic stuff that for anyone new to the whole process, what is the querying process? What is it typically like for those who are unindoctrinated?
I'll jump in from an author's perspective. I wasn't very new to the idea of querying. I started writing Skylight in 2017. I finished it in 2021. I think like I typed at the beginning of January 2021. No clue what querying was, had no idea what I was supposed to do, but I've been in sales and I've written academic papers and I knew how to write synopses. And I finally kind of realized as I Googled things and I looked at sample templates, I'm like, okay, querying is just writing a pitch, write a one-pager about your story, send it out to people who are interested or looking for those kinds of stories. I was like, I'm a communication person. I should know how to analyze audiences and be able to read between the lines. And that is so not the case. It is not the case. I queried it. It's just sending a one-page pitch letter, if you think about it, highlighting all the core aspects of your story, who you are as a writer or who you want to present yourself as a writer, and hope that that letter shines through to the other person reading and make those agents and editors want to read more of your story. It's a very short, limited speed dating without seeing people. And you have to really have faith and confidence that your words are going to connect to that person on the other side. So I think of it like writing your personal statement for college applications. I'm very much similar to it, and that's kind of how I approached it. But for those who are unindoctrinated, boil point, in a nutshell, it's your pitch letter. Tell us what your story is in one page, doesn't matter how long you took, who you want to be, and hope that those words connect with an agent or an editor who's on the other side.
Yeah, I could add to it. I mean, Patchree summed it up pretty well. I guess the one thing I would add is that another part of querying is that you have to kind of do a lot of research and stay organized. And, when you're looking for agents, you don't want to just like do a shotgun blast out to anyone because you're wasting your time and their time. If you're querying someone who doesn't take your genre or, age range. So another big part of the process is researching, keeping track of what agents' guidelines are, because you have to make sure you hit their guidelines. They don't all want the same sample materials. And then just getting used to a lot of rejection and waiting. Like you just have to kind of settle in and just keep going and not get discouraged when the rejections start rolling in, and they will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can hop in and say one thing before Keir takes over. I think one of the things that is so important about the query and distinguishes itself from like a synopsis or a summary is like you're also selling in some ways like yourself as an author. So I always like to think like the query is like the who, what, when, where, why. And then like the extra additional question is like why you, right? Like why are you the writer? Like what about you works for the story, for what you're trying to tell, I think Patchree hit it on the head. It's like kind of like speed dating. That feels like very intentionally almost kind of what it is, right? You're in a partnership with your literary agent at the end of the day, and then selling it to an editor. So you also have that relationship as well. So I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about it, but I don't know if Keir wants to add anything there.
I gotta be very careful that I'm not just gonna explode with words. I kind of have two perspectives on this. One is my perspective as an indoctrinated writer from the Global South. before I got my my mentorship with Jen and became an agent, and then the perspective after, right? And I feel like it's all summed up in an experience I had recently. There was a local writers conference for just local writers who had published books to like come together, like share their books. There was a whole there were a bunch of panels and stuff in the evening, and I wasn't invited or anything. I just happened to find out about it, and most people did not know that I existed. A lot of people there were self-published and did not know what an agent was, or how to query them, or anything about how to get into traditional publishing. And I wish I could say that I thought that this was unlikely. Like, I wish I could say that I thought this was unusual, but that is what it is like in most, I think, of my region, and by extension in most of the global south. And so much of like, what is it like for those unindoctrinated? It isn't, because they don't know this exists. You know what I mean? And so much of that is about access to information. I had known what a literary agent was when I was like, I don't know, somewhere between the ages of 17 and 23. I figured out what an agent was, and I was like, oh, well, I guess publishing will never be for me because I had the wrong passport, I had the wrong residency, you know. The idea of being an agent was great, but I was like, well, maybe I can be a writer. And that was fine for me because at the time, that's what I wanted to do. Not to say I don't want to write anymore, but I did not even conceive of dreaming to be or do more than that because it was just so outside of my reach. I do think that around the same time I found that mentorship opportunity, I would say about a year before, maybe a little over a year, I joined a Pitch Wars server where I learned more about querying and writing a query letter and writing a synopsis and anything. I learned more in that like informal Discord server than I had learned about anything to do with the querying and traditional publishing process before, as somebody who had known what agents were 10 years prior. And so all of that is access to information. I got that by complete accident. I didn't even know what Pitch Wars was until maybe 3 days before I joined this server. I had no idea what a pitch event was, nothing, right? I knew the barest of basics. And it's just a lack of information and a lack of access to information for people who aren't in one of those countries that have a strong publishing industry. The strongest publishing industry, you know, fight me if you want, but it's the US publishing industry, you know? So I think, you know, so what is the querying process? I think if you are unindoctrinated, the answer is the what? And if you know what the querying process is, but you're not indoctrinated, you end up writing, so many people describe, and I guess I'm going to get into like the agent side now, and Adria, by all means, tell me I'm talking too much. But from the agenting side, I see this a lot in my inbox. People who typically, we describe the query letter as a cover letter, which is an inaccurate description. And so people will write it like a cover letter, like they would write for a job or something, you know, or if they're submitting some documentation. And I am probably one of the few agents, because of that experience I had where I had no idea what anything was in publishing. And because I know so many people who are from the Global South query me specifically because I'm looking for that, and they don't have access to this information. I actually have a past email that is specifically like, hey, I think this is a really interesting concept, but your query wasn't really written to industry standards, and so it's hard for me to figure out what your story is actually about. Why don't you take a look at this website or these guidelines and these things, and then query me again after you've written a new letter or changed your letter. It turns out that that's very unusual for people to get because folks will just receive a pass, like, oh, this wasn't for me, and they won't realize it's because they wrote a query letter as though it's a cover letter, right? And I get that a lot. I also get people who will write a synopsis in they will put the blurb of the query letter in the synopsis section so that it's there twice. Yeah, and just think, I can go on about the things that I've seen, but let me save something for later.
Yeah, there's I think there's a lot, and we have stuff coming up, and obviously at the end, you know, if there's anything you feel like we didn't get covered, I always want, you know, additional things. Yeah, I think that's interesting though, that your thought is that for the unindoctrinated, the answer is what is querying, because they've just not even heard about that. So hopefully we can do some outreach and get more people understanding too. And I think it's great that you have that pass.
If I can add one thing to that, as you mentioned that, this occurs to me, is that I think that typically for those of us who are indoctrinated, we don't think of the unindoctrinated as people who don't know it exists. We think it's just people who don't have all the information, right? And I think there's a really interesting distinction to think about there, because they're the people who want to be part of this but have no idea this process exists, and then they're the people who want to be part of this, know this process exists, and then just don't know enough. So like they're two sets.
Okay, well, we'll keep that in mind as we go through. Hopefully we can make sure we address both groups of people. And then also people who already know it exists, but just due to marginalization have additional barriers and hurdles. So everyone got a chance to say everything? Okay. So then going from that with the marginalization, how is this process different or more difficult for marginalized authors, and how has this changed over the years?
I'm going to jump in first because it seems the easiest. In terms of being like, I can't really explain how it's changed over the years, because I learned what a query was 3 years ago. But I would say I'm quick to learn, and that's maybe an advantage to me. And I think we kind of talked about it in another panel where we're all older. It's the advantage of being an older debut author, right? Is that we've lived the whole world and you've lived the whole life, that you can find the way, or you know how to be able to research it. So as Keir's saying, we have the ability to have access to information, or if we're going to jump into the process, the learning curve is a bit different, but it's also difficult because the opportunities, I feel like, are much, much smaller. When I first started querying, I didn't really understand what publishing is. I always knew like self-publishing was something that was there and it's an option. Now it's something it seems frowned upon. And as I jump into the writing community, or jumped back in 3 years ago, that's when I started really kind of understanding what industry standards meant. So I think I felt, as someone who is on the outside and marginalized, I didn't really know what industry standards were. And I sat, and like Salinee was saying, you're doing a lot of research. And if you don't do that research, you just think that, okay, well, maybe if I do the research and I try to find the right person, that this story is going to land on the right desk. And so for me, it's looking for keywords, looking for things in agents and in their manuscript wish lists, right? Even understanding what NSWL was. I'm like, what the heck are these acronyms? Because I'm horrible at acronyms. And I asked my kids, what is this? What does this mean? Or my husband, I'm like, what is this? I have no clue what it means. And now it's like, they don't understand any of the writing related or publishing industry related acronyms either. But as I go in, it's trying to really decide and determine, does what this person's wish list really include me? Or are they just saying it for political reasons, right? As I actually query, I felt like so much of the time, even though you had, when I started querying, agents are like, we want diverse literature. We really, really need diverse stories. We really, really want Asian stories. And it's like, well, I have a Thai American story. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. There aren't very many out there. There's probably, like, we can count them on our hands, how many Thai stories are out there. And as opposed to everything else. And you feel like you're just using the keywords to make sure that you seem inclusive. but so much of it was the form rejection saying, oh, this sounds really good, but I just couldn't connect. And so it's trying to say, well, do you really want to connect, or are you just saying it because you want to sound PC, right? And you want to make sure that you're in on the right trends, and feel open enough. And it felt like it was a much, much higher bar that I had to go through. And after a year of the rejections, it's just like, you know what, this isn't it. I don't know what these standards are. And you do have to take a moment and step back and reassess, do I really need to claim this? And what is there a better route for it? Maybe this just isn't the commercialized story I thought it could be, when that's not really the case. So it becomes difficult because, at least from the 3 years, trying to really know, are you riding a wave? And do people really want to be more inclusive, or are we just saying it and not really acting on it? And then learning how slow publishing is in general, that's like a whole different learning curve that makes it difficult.
Yeah, I did want to add something there also, Patrick. And I think like when there is marginalization in the publishing process, whether that's like inception of a novel, whether you're drafting it and querying it, whether you're acquiring it or working on it in the agency side, like there's a different level, and I think you have to operate and function on the text at a different level. Like I always think, for example, I know I'm sure we've all heard conversations about, let's say, like internality for like young adult mind. But I'm like, that internality will look very different from a neurodivergent perspective than it does from somebody who isn't. And so when you're talking about pacing, like that's going to be they're two totally different experiences. So when people are like, I don't connect, you might have to do a little bit more work. If you, for example, are not neurodivergent and you're an agent, you have to put in a little bit more work in order to get there. So I think it's also hard on the agenting and editing standpoint when there are those of us who are doing that extra work and others maybe are just it's an immediate, right? Like form rejection, form pass. So I think on both sides it's an interesting process, but I think hopefully it's getting a little bit better as conversations are happening around on all sides of publishing, I guess I should say.
Yeah, I think I feel like one of the big changes that we can actually like tangibly view is that direction into just being more digital and more electronic. Like my opportunity to be an agent did not exist even 5 years ago, right? Or 6 or 7 years ago, much less 10 or 15. I think that we all have heard, we've all read that blog post or whatever about, I think it was Stephanie Meyer, who went from 0 to publish in 6 months, right? And that was when everything was still snail mail, right? Or 0 to publishing deal, right? In 6 months, not book on shelf, but deal. And everything was still snail mail. And so I do think that there are fewer barriers now, but I mean, that's not to say there are no barriers, because if you don't have internet, that's still a huge barrier. And there's still a large percentage of the world that, that doesn't. But at that, and then at that time when it was all snail mail, you had to be able to afford to print a manuscript probably multiple times if you're sending it to multiple agents or agencies, to print it and physically mail that massive document out, right? Which is what she did. So I think that is definitely drastically different now. And I think that we as an industry have not yet adapted to what that change means, just on an operational and a functional level. Because as agents, right, if I'm getting snail mail, I'm probably only getting a few manuscripts every week or month. And now that it's by email, despite my very, very narrow like group of people that I'm open to queries from, if I open to queries today, like I will have 500 or more queries before the month is out, probably before 2 weeks is out, right? And that happened before I had any sales. That happened the day I opened queries back in 2022, when all anybody knew about me was that I was kind of brown and kind of silly and looking for marginalized voices, you know? Well, maybe not kind of, but you know what I mean? Like nobody knew anything about me. And so I do think that it has like, there are fewer barriers, but now not maybe not fewer, there are different barriers now altogether, because now every marginalized voice, just like Patchree was saying, you're going up against, instead of 10 queries or like 10 other voices, you're going up against hundreds of other voices in that inbox every single time you try to reach out and make a connection with an agent. And you know, at the end of the day, it's still a system where the people you know will help you get further than knowing nobody, right? Again, not to say that cold querying doesn't work. Obviously, it works all the time. But if I'm closed for, 6 months out of the year and one of my clients says, hey, I have this book that I think you'll really love, can I send this person my referral link for you? That person will get to query me even if I'm closed, right? Same thing with a pitch link. And without these opportunities for marginalized voices and marginalized authors, they get more and more marginalized.
Sal, did you have anything you'd like to add?
I didn't really have anything for this question. I'm sorry.
No problem.
I-
So in that case, though, you talked about, and I'd kind of like to look at that a little bit more about how whether we have more or fewer barriers, right? So it seems like we have better access with the internet. I know that when I wrote my first novel, and I don't even remember if it was truly a novel or not, back in a number of years ago, I had to send away for a list of agents from the US.
Yeah, there was a book, right? There was a directory like Agent Yellow Pages. Yeah.
Yep, and they had like little, I don't have it anymore. I probably should have saved it.
I think
In
I have
hindsight.
one of them. They're like this guide to agents every
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, and then like where you would mail your stuff off to and whatnot. And so but you had to like know, and I have no idea because I did do this as like a teenager, living in the middle of the US. So I, had at least all that access. So I had some privileges to know this stuff. And I have no idea who told me you need this, and so therefore how to send off for it. But and no, I never queried. But now we have the internet, but as you said, not everyone has internet access. So I'm kind of wondering, how do people find out if they don't have internet? But we also maybe don't have these networks that I happen to run into as a child. How has that changed, and how what do we what is this question?
I'll be honest, I don't think that has changed. I think it's always a you don't know what you don't know,
Okay.
right? So like I mentioned that those writers at the conference I went to, they were all self-published. And just so we're clear, because Patchree mentioned this, is that I don't actually think there's a problem with self-publishing. I know I'm an agent, shoot me. I should probably think that you shouldn't do it, but I actually think that there's a lot of merit to it. I think there's a lot of merit to indie publishing. I have a lot of feelings about. A lot of things have been very successful in self-publishing that TradPub would never touch. And it's really just because TradPub is so behind. And I'll fully admit to that. This is the field that I work in. I know, what's going on there. But the reason that so many of those authors were self-published isn't because they looked at the options and decided this was best for them, fully informed. It's because they literally just thought they had no other choice. So you don't know what you don't know. So I think that for like the folks who don't have the internet, or folks who, because like let me tell you, I stumbled into my resource. It was a complete accident, just a complete accident. I Google food the right thing, right? Like that's what happened. And if you don't have that happy accident, and you don't have other access, then you don't have it. And I think that's actually the case for a lot of people. unless somebody steps into your life and says, oh, here is a channel to all of this information that you didn't have before, or until you stumble upon that like entryway, whether that's a person or it's online, you just don't know. And honestly, I feel like there are ways to solve this problem, but those ways actually go well beyond publishing as an industry and much more into infrastructure and global politics and economies and, you know, those things. And I could talk about that, but again, let me keep something for later.
Sure. Well, and yeah, although, you know, I don't know about, I guess with no internet, but YouTube, hopefully maybe somebody will stumble upon the WriteHive YouTube conference and get information. I am in front of a window and the sun has decided to come out even though it wasn't supposed to. So I apologize for the weird shading of my face. Okay. So then with the barriers having changed, what might be some of the barriers that have changed besides just everything going online and that access? What for people of marginalized identities?
I think one thing that I can touch on, and you know, it's changed. I don't know if it's necessarily in like a great way or a bad way, but I think like pitch contests, like just how that has exploded in the last couple of years. You know, specifically, like I got my agent from Latinx Pitch on Twitter when Twitter was still Twitter and not what it is now. And it was great, you know, at that time, you know, we were really being able to have pitch contests like for very specific marginalizations. Like I think it was a great way to have agents and editors be able to really clearly see voices that they wanted to. And I know in the last like year or so, there's been a lot of conversations about there being like so many pitch contests that now it's sort of diluted what the experience was a few years back. So that's one thing. I don't know if Patchree or Sal, y'all have any thoughts on that, or care if you have thoughts on agenting side, but I know from me, from acquisitions, it's really difficult to wade into pitch contests now. You know, I definitely still attempt, but I think also with changing social media platforms and how we gather in community groups, it's just hard. I think that's one element that I think was going really well and now is kind of shifting and changing.
Yeah, I remember when I was learning about, you know, when I did the Google, like how to get published, had no idea, you know, what is an agent? I had no idea. Like, and then once you get an agent, I didn't know that, you know, there was a thing called sub, which is down the line. And then I was so disappointed, like, finally got an agent. And then it's like, oh, there's another barrier. Here we go. But yeah, for the pitch contest, I do remember like DV Pit, is that still going on? I don't know if it is, not anymore. But I remember like being really excited, like, oh, this is cool. Like we can actually kind of get a spotlight on these types of stories. And I still kind of like seeing the different ones, even though I agree with you that there are so many now that it's like hard to know if agents are really looking at them all the time because it's just a lot to keep up with.
I can tell you from the agenting. Oh, you go first.
Oh, it was just a quick ad in terms of, I definitely found my publisher. So I'm not agented and I signed with the small press. So the book is being signed with the small press. The publishers asked me, when they requested the full, if I wanted to try to query for an agent. And I had told them, no, I did it for a year. I'm too old. I don't want to wait. And I'm like, this is like a side, it's not a side project. It's definitely a large goal and a nice dream come true. And I'm glad to see like be able to physically hold it in my hands and have the kids smile at it. That's really, really cool. But when I went with the small press, you know, they gave me that option to try to go on the agenting route. And as a writer and as somebody who's new, I really had to decide, was that something that I was okay with? And when I talk to other writers now, I definitely say, you know, there's nothing wrong. I love my small press, and I love the fact that they're small because we can learn together and we can make mistakes together, and I'm okay with it. And so I'm a bit more realistic and humble, and down to earth and practical about what that process would be. And I think when you think of the pitch contest, I found them through a pitch contest, long story short. But I think with pitch contests, then it's trying to decide, how do we deal with hashtags? Because I'm horrible with them. And how do I really have to define myself? What does it mean to be, are we just doing AAPI? Are we just doing this? And knowing all the rules for the contest, is fantasy, or are we just using F? And then you're limited in characters. And it was just like so overwhelming and so stressful. And so I know we had talked about the rise of the own voices hashtag, and it's like, do I claim it as own voices? Does it mean that my characters are like me and I am in that? So how do I try to associate it and not feel like I'm just trying to jump in on a trend, even though that is in fact my story or my identity? Those are like really a lot of questions that you'd have to ask yourselves, how comfortable you are with that sense of being vulnerable to letting people know this is what it is. And then adding on top of it all the no's you get or the lack of engagement, then you're like, forget it, I'm done with it, I'm going to bed. Right, give me some coffee, I'm going to turn on a show, and I don't want to deal with this anymore. So those hashtags is really like another kind of barrier, that you have to understand and know how to be able to work with them.
I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about like self pub, indie pub, small pub, traditional pub, but I know that like Kara and I have had a moment too with like conversations about, like different authors, projects. And so I think it is really difficult when you go the small press route versus an agent route. Like both are great, but they just offer different things.
What Lauren's saying is, I've lost authors to her.
I'm sorry.
That's what she's like not saying. No,
I didn't want to come on and say it, but yes, I'm so
No, but
sorry, Kara.
I want to hear that story.
But like, I'm not like, the thing is though, is that I think I do feel like other agents would feel differently about this, right? But like sometimes, so one, I think that choosing to skip getting an agent to go with that small press, one, I think it actually just says a lot about Lauren as a fantastic editor. You know what I mean? I'm biased because Lauren's a friend of mine. And I adore Lauren. So, but sometimes you just realize, like you said, Patchree, like you like a small press because you can learn together, you can grow together, you can do all of those things. And I think that sometimes that is what authors want. As far as like pitch contests and those things, from the agenting perspective, when I was super, super, super fresh, like the month or the first 6 months, or maybe even the first year that I was agenting, I did do my very best to participate in every single pitch event that was for marginalized voices, every single. And a lot of my clients actually are a result of my participation in those events. My very first client, even, but I will also say that there were so many, and there was just so much to comb through. And like you said, you have to navigate hashtags, and I remember speaking to other agents when I was first doing pitch events, and they were like, they just sit down with like their cup of tea or their whatever, and they just scroll. They just have the one main hashtag and they just scroll. And I'm like, I can't do that, right? I'm a little neurodivergent gremlin. I can't do that. Can't do that. So I actually like wrote out a proper search term. So not colon, quotation marks, hashtag this capital or space, hashtag that capital OR. or sometimes I did and, depending on the terms, right? But like I did like a really like a proper search term so that it would not bring me back a bunch of stuff that made no sense, which happened when I did not use my quotation marks. And that's how I found voices specifically that like pitches specifically that I would that'd be like, oh, I like these vibes. And that's another thing is that, like you were saying, there are all of these character limitations for the Twitter pitch events, right? A lot of people, pitching is a skill. Pitching is a skill. Writing a blurb is a skill. Writing a one-liner, those things are skills that you have to develop and often take time to develop. So I do often just like pitches based on vibes. I'm like, I like the vibes. Click. Let's see, because you might be a fantastic writer and you just haven't been able to pitch your book in one line, which is fine, because outside of this moment, you will never have to pitch your book in one line, because that will become my job if I represent you, right? And I feel like, I don't know, like I think that there's just two sides to this. On the one side, we have agents who, if they want to reduce just the sheer workload that they have waiting for them, which is unpaid unless a book sells, right? And then if the book doesn't sell for like a huge amount, which is most books, then it's barely paid. You know, like if we want to reduce that amount of work, we're going to be depending on whatever that author actually puts in their pitch. You know what I mean? But then on the writer side, it's like, this is not my skill set. And this is not actually what you're going to be recruiting me and representing me for. Like, ultimately, it's going to be your job. So why do I have to be so good at it? So I feel really torn about the whole thing, which I think is why I'm just very chill about it. And I think I've totally done my ADHD thing and gone on a completely different tangent to where I was supposed to be. But basically, like with pitch events, I do think that there's just so much pitch fatigue. There's just a lot of pitch fatigue. We have, you know, there's going to be, I think by the time this video is out, there will be a new agent at Azantian who, similar to me, they'll also be taking queries primarily from marginalized voices. And they were talking to me about pitch events recently. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to participate in this, but when is it? Oh, do I have the brain power? And the thing is that I really want to, but I also am fully aware that neurodivergent gremlin brain will shut down, and I have no control over that. So I do feel like for marginalized authors, you know, because we have all of these pitch events that have been geared specifically for marginalized authors, they get a pretty crappy end of the stick in that with that perspective, because agents don't have they just don't have the bandwidth to do as many pitch events. And of course, there's all of the like what does it mean for Twitter to be X now, and AI scraping, and there's all of that to worry about. And DV Pit, which is no longer running, did get moved to Discord, and I tried to participate in that, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I think
day.
not the pitches by any means, yeah, but the user interface of Discord for that purpose, that was not the purpose that Discord was made for, and it was just very hard to navigate. I think I got through most of the adult pitches that I really wanted, like you know, because and that's what I was really looking for at the time. But I do not think I got through all of the YA pitches at all. It was just too hard. It was so hard to navigate. And so like,
yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to move on to the own voices thing.
I just wanted to say one thing that you made me think of when you're talking about it is like, it can be very like discouraging for marginalized authors participating in these pitch events if they know, okay, I really like this agent, like, oh, I see they've been liking some pitches and stuff, but they didn't like mine. But actually, you can just query them, you know. You don't have to like wait for because they might not have seen it, you know. So I think that's something to remember too. If you're going to participate in these events, like you can just query.
And that is 100%. One of my most recent clients, actually, we had on our offer call, actually, we had a whole conversation about how she had participated in DV Pit and she got like exactly 0 likes. And I had been raving about this book for like, I told everybody who would listen to me about this book, right? My husband found out about it. My mom found out about it. I read like the first line of this book to them, like probably twice each at least. Every single agent at Azantian heard about this book. Like, you know, like I raved about this book. And that author, it was a YA book. that author got 0 pitch likes when they did DV pitch. And I was just like, lucky for me, I guess, because you queried me and now we're here. And I do think so, like, I think Patchree, you had mentioned on the Own Voices hashtag. I feel like the Own Voices conversation is kind of its own, I feel like it's its own beast, because as an agent who's only representing marginalized voices, right, that is good for me to know, because I don't know if I'm going to get a Rachel Dolezal in my inbox, right? I don't know. Right? Most people are not going to out themselves like that. If you, and I just have to trust, I just have to have faith that if you're querying me, you are who you say you are.
Right.
And you are writing sensitively about anything that, you know, is outside of your wheelhouse, right? Like that, you know what I mean? And so when I see authors using that Own Voices hashtag, I'm like, okay, great. You know, you are obviously already open about this and like public about this, and that's wonderful. But I also do agree that you should not be forced to or required to use it, right? You should not have to out yourself. You know, I've had conversations with authors who are like, I don't use it because I'm not out, or I don't use it because where I live, if somebody from my neighborhood saw this, I would not be safe anymore. You know? And in my own like in the process of querying me specifically, I do actually have a section, because so much, like, why would you tell a stranger this? Like, if I thought I was going to be unsafe, I was not telling a stranger this. I don't care if I think that stranger is supposed to be like, it's going to represent me. After you represent me, you can find out. Like, after you've decided. But I do have a section in my like query manager submission where it says you are not obligated to disclose, but if you wish to disclose, because I'm only open to marginalized voices, you can say that here. And that is private. Nobody else gets to see that. You don't have to include it in your main query letter if you feel unsafe, and you don't have to fill it out if you feel unsafe. And I think that is actually I feel like that is something that more people should do, because for the people who are using a standard query letter that they're sending to everybody, they're not going to want to put that identity for everybody. You know, I mean, to be fair, I think, why are you querying an agent who you feel unsafe, like, giving this information to? But I mean, at the end of the day, all of these people are going to be strangers. So maybe you feel unsafe for everybody, and that's fine, you know? But for the folks, like, I've heard that some agents ask, why are you the right person to tell this story? Which is, I am told, because again, neurodivergent, like, brain, I don't know, I am told that this means in code, you know, are you like, are you misrepresenting a group, or are you part of the group you're talking about, or something like that? And I don't know, I have all kinds of feelings about this. I feel like as long as that information is kept as private as possible, then it's okay, but it should not be required to divulge.
Yeah, when I was querying this book, it is a Thai inspired fantasy, and being half Thai, I was like, I used the Own Voices hashtag when it was, I think it was around 2020. So, but it felt true to me, like, because I was like, well, yeah, this is, you know, in my, like, celebrating my heritage, so I thought it was important to include, just like if I was writing a book about, like, you know, like music or something, I would say I was in a band. You know, that's kind of how it felt, like, in my bio is why, or in the, you know, metadata of the book is why I included it. Like, yeah, this is, you know, so, you know, I know I'm talking about. But I have seen that, like, why are you the person to write this book thing on the query manager? And a lot of times I would skip it because I just felt so like, because I wanted to write it. Like, why are you asking this? So I appreciate the, like, line that you said you had in yours about the, like, you don't have to disclose if you don't want. I think that's something that more agents should include.
Yeah, the phrasing of, like, why are you the right person always bugs. Oh, sorry, that's just my cat. Phoebe. The phrasing of like, why are you the right person specifically bugs me, because when I first heard that question, I was like, well, I don't know. There are like 10,000 right people to write this book. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
There are so many people who could write this book. Hi, buddy.
So with that, with the own voices, is there anything additional we'd like to discuss? I think, we did kind of cover how it, it came as a rise as a way for, say, agents to make sure that the person writing a story was writing sensitively about any given topic. But then it did become a way to like kind of force out people, which didn't work so well. And then it became a bit of a marketing tool, which I think, as somebody with some marginalizations, I have really have a lot of feelings about whether that's really something I want to be doing or not, right? I don't know, maybe one of you know, it felt like it was maybe dying down for a little bit, but maybe it's still being used a lot as well. In terms
Yeah, I
of,
only use it. I queried like, I want to say like 5 or 6 novels before this one got agented and sold. So it kind of made me think like, well, do they only want my own voice's story, because it seems to be like becoming a trend. So I kind of got a little salty about it a little bit too. But so that's how I can like, I wouldn't use it now on other stories because I just write whatever I want. And I think anyone should be able to, as long as they do it with the right amount of like research if they're not from that, demographic or whatever.
I think for me, I'm seeing it more like internally rather than externally. Like I feel like people are using it more like from a query to an agent or like team members talking about something rather than like the publisher themselves like advertising something as own voices, which I think was feeling a little icky. I agree with you there, Adria. Like it felt a little, I don't know the right word to use there, but I'll
Disadvantage us.
Like,
yeah.
Predatory.
Yeah.
Exploitative, maybe?
Exploitative, that's the perfect word. That's what I was going for.
I was fine with icky.
Yeah. Both work, same thing.
And so it does seem, at least with publishers, they have veered away from that in terms of marketing again. So that's good to hear. Yeah, always with the pitch, I've done a few pitch events too, and it's always just a little bit, how do you navigate how you choose all those?
And
Because
I will
go ahead.
I
Lauren.
was gonna say the only other thing I'll add for like pitches specifically, which I think is kind of to kind of loop it back a little bit around to querying specifically, but it's utilized, I think, really well for like really high concept work or like really quippy work, which I think a lot of the time marginalized creators were not necessarily doing. Our books take a little bit more time to explain or explore or like dive into. We're not necessarily just like writing, not that we're not writing tropey, very high concept, but there's often like something else happening. And so I feel like some of the time pitch contests or, queries for non-marginalized agents / authors are really difficult for publishing professionals to like figure out. It's maybe not as simple as saying Twilight meets, I don't know what else would work here, but some other comp that feels very high concept in the experience. You have to explain a little more to have it be understood. So I think that's also something that is difficult when you're looking at marginalized writers specifically.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add was on this idea that anytime you label something, there are 2 sides to it. It's either going to be great if somebody reads it the right way, or it's going to work against you because somebody's not reading it the right way. So however you have it, and whenever we have to use tags or labels or categories, you're always going to be running up against a wall that's either going to let you get across it, or it's an automatic rejection. So however you decide, there's no right way to use it, I don't think, or there's no right or wrong answer for how you choose to approach it. Because even if our people are using it, however you frame yourself or see yourself, that's your choice and that's your identity. So where do you get off as an agent or an editor or a publisher telling me that's not who I am? And it's no different than denying me my own experience, however that would be. So, or using it the other way, shying away from it, like me reclaiming Patchree. I mean, that's the name I was born with. But I grew up having to live with that name. And when I didn't have to use it, I wouldn't use it. But as a professional choice, I knew that this had to be, it's almost very political in its usage. And it's like I'm reclaiming it and I'm leaning into my identity because it's okay now. 20 years ago, there's no way this book would not have been out there. I would not be walking around as Patchree. People know me as Patty somewhere on the streets because somebody in kindergarten called me Patty because they saw my name and they're like, I don't know how to say that. So like however you use it, it's always this double-edged sword that you have to be ready to face as a marginalized person, because that's not a challenge that unmarginalized or those in the mainstream have to deal with. So
Oh my
Just to
God,
jump
I
off of
think
something
you're
you
me.
said there. Oh, sorry.
I'm just
No, you go first because I've been
oh,
very
I was
combative.
just agreeing. I was like, oh my God, are you me? Like,
Yeah. So to jump off of that, or both of those comments, in fact, I feel like this is a great part to remind everyone that all art is political, right? And everything we do is kind of political when we are artists or we work in the artistic field, right? Like you said, this book would not have been possible 20 years ago. You could not have used this name 20 years ago, right? I think that a lot of the advantages I've had in my life is actually because not only is my, where is it? Here. Not only is this name not considered a femme name, this is supposed to be a boy's name. It also is Celtic. It's not Indian. It's not brown. The person with this name is not supposed to be brown, right? I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten Mr. like whatever. Yeah, exactly. And I actually think that gave me an unusual number of advantages. Of course, things always change once people actually saw my face or heard my voice. But by then it was too late. No take backsies. And that was nice. But something that Lauren had said earlier about that high concept pitch, right? Is that those events really lend themselves to the high concept thing. Now, and I say this in another panel, I think for this year, in fact, that I genuinely believe that every story can be pitched in a high concept way. That is my personal belief. But I mean, again, that is a skill that you develop. That is not something that you can always do, especially when because I can't do it for my own work. High concept pitch for my work? No. Give me somebody else's thing, somebody else's stuff to do. And then coming from that and thinking about this in the context of marginalized voices, so many people who are from a marginalized background, they may not be writing with the Save the Cat structure, the 3-act structure, or Freytag's pyramid, or, like any of those hero's journey, any of those Western structures, or what we refer to as the Western structures. They may be using something else. And I think that this is another thing that people are coming up against, like in a way that makes it problematic for marginalized voices, because the biggest part of the industry right now doesn't know how to read and appreciate a book and pitch a book that is not written that way, right? I have to actively choose, because I was raised on that same stuff. That same Western media that had this very, specific and if you ask anybody else, this was a privilege that I was able to be raised in that way. And it is, because without it, I couldn't be here today. But now, having been raised that way and indoctrinated into this way of thinking, this very specific form, I have to actively choose to reconnect with work that is more influenced by oral tradition, that is more influenced by it's more cyclic storytelling, or it's more braided storytelling, or it's more frame story, right? I have to actively choose to engage with that work, and I have to go in there knowing, I have to go in there understanding that this is not going to be like everything else that I've read, but I need to be open to loving it and enjoying it in the same way, right? And that is not just about the bigger structure, but that's also on the line level too, right? Things are described or written on the line level in a really different way sometimes. And it's it does seem disconcerting or uncomfortable if you're not used to that, or if you're not going in there with that in mind, right? And so I think that's another thing that underrepresented voices kind of come up against. And then when we add to that the pitching and coming up with like a hot, snappy one-line pitch, you know, they've already got the hurdle of writing something that, you know, the average agent probably doesn't know about or think about or look for. And now they have to condense that into yet another Western form that they may not be aiming, you know. And that's why so many people feel like their story doesn't lend itself to a high concept pitch, because you're already playing with a form that is not formulaic in the way some of these other forms could be formulaic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So there's, between the way that they're writing it and then trying to apply it to these one-line pitches can be very difficult. Well, let's move on. So with the, you know, the way the own voices has played out in the query process, how we have the groups of people who don't know what they don't know, which is querying, and have maybe self-published, or people who just don't know, they don't have all the information. Has this resulted in more marginalized creators going indie? And what other effects has the process had on writers from marginalized communities?
I don't know if Patchree, do you want to take this first from the author perspective?
I feel like either you or Keir should start with it, because you guys are on the front lines and we're just like, we're the pigs running in, we're the little guinea pigs in a hamster wheel, hoping that somebody's gonna pick it up. So you guys are the ones who are, at least you have like your one level ahead where you get to push the stories and you get to sell it. And like, we're stuck, you know, old school screenwriters stuck in
In my cave,
smoking room, like trying to scribble it out, going, what do you want to do? So like, I feel you guys should start with this.
Well, I feel like I have a very interesting perspective, only because like I am agented myself and have most of my writing going that traditional publishing route, but also am running acquisitions for a small press. So, you know, so I'm on that side of working in indie spaces. And I think one thing that I can say is, obviously I pretty much acquire across the board like marginalized voices. However, that the writers interpret that is very open to interpretation, but that's really where my bread and butter is. And I will say majority of them in some way in conversations have become either like disillusioned with very like corporate spaces, or disillusioned with, you know, they've been querying from a lot of them. Like I've queried for like 5 years or more, and you know, they were not getting any interest, or their concept was too weird or unsellable, or you know, this specific genre is just not possible in traditional publishing. So I feel like quite a few of them, if they're not going the self-pub route, are looking for indies for that sort of middle ground, right? Like you still have that sense of community with other writers who are being published. You do have some institutional support with the smaller staff, who I think a lot of the time are also marginalized in some ways. A lot of indie publishers are there for a reason, like finding a gap in the industry that they want to fill. So I think, long answer short, yes, I feel like a lot of marginalized writers are going indie pub routes, but I could be biased because that's what I'm seeing in my inbox and I'm coming from an indie perspective. But yeah, I'd love to see what Keir has to say here.
I think The answer is also yes. But I also think that we have the opportunity to break that pattern down even further. So for a lot of reasons, I think that marginalized creators are going more indie and self-pub. Some of it is just that what they want to write topically is not typical trad pub fare, right? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that it's because of their specific marginalized voice, like a marginalized background. I just mean like content-wise, what they want to write is, you know, it's not what would typically would get picked up and get paid well in trad pub. And so I think that that's part of it. But something else that I'm seeing is that a lot of the marginalized creators that I know who have gone indie or who are leaning to that, it's exactly what you described before, where they've been querying for however many years and they're super disillusioned by this process now, and it's been so tough, and they tend to be over 25 or over 30. I think that a lot of the marginalized voices that are younger, it's not that they're not doing indie and self-pub, right? But I think that they are not quite so disillusioned at trad pub either, and they are still kicking down those doors. Me alone, I think I have like 5 clients under the age of 25, 5 or 6 clients, right? My youngest client is 19. She recently posted on Twitter about how I kept telling her to go finish her essay before I sent edits to her. Because she was not focused on her essay for school. I think she is my youngest client, but she's also not the first client I signed when they were just 19. One of my other clients turned 20 recently, you know, and I obviously didn't know this when I was reading the book. I didn't know that at the time. And it's not an issue for me either, as long as, you know, they're not dropping out of school for this or something, you know what I mean? But I do think that even when you look at traditional publishing, there are a lot of very successful authors out there who their debut novel, they were in their early 20s, or they had, which means that if they were already in their early 20s when the book came out, then they signed and sold that book before they hit that number, right? Because that would have happened years before. And so I do feel like a lot of marginalized authors or creators are hitting the trad pub route first. And then, you know, those of us who've already been here for a while and now we're tired and we're disillusioned because the market wasn't open to us in the same way it is now. And again, I don't think the market is that much more open, clearly, I don't know. But it is more open now than it was. And so like, I think those of us who've had to deal with it when it was super closed off, we've moved on. We're like, this is not for me. There's no place for me here. And then the younger folks are like, I can't curse on this, right? So like, they're like, F you, I'm going to make a place for myself here. And they're doing it. There are a lot of editors too that I know who are from marginalized backgrounds. And quite a few of them are like, yeah, like they will prioritize, marginalized voices or BIPOC voices specifically, or, you know, folks who have experiences like they do with some neurodivergent experience or background, or, you know, something like that. So like, I feel like, yes, people are moving more to that indie and self-pub, but then there's also this other group of, I do think that it's also very separated into like, you know, the people who've already been like, been jaded by the process, and the people who are just coming in and they're like, I'm gonna show you what I've got, you know?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, when you think of younger writers, the way that people consume content now has changed. So people aren't going to the libraries and picking up books, or, you know, your school libraries. My daughter's school, her high school doesn't even have a library. And I'm like, how are you guys a blue ribbon school? You guys don't even have a freaking library. What's wrong with you? So like, but the way that kids nowadays are consuming these stories and the way that they're doing it, I think they're almost redefining what traditionally published means, because they're not
Yeah.
going to wait. The younger generation, they're a lot smarter than we were at their age. I know my kids are like they're way smarter than I was when I was their age. And that comes from it goes back to your issues of access, having access to the internet, having access to the speed in which they can learn these things. They don't believe they need to wait, and they are going to find a way to disrupt the system with creating their own content. Anybody now can sit in their room, turn on a camera, start talking to themselves in their weird space and gain like hundreds and thousands or if not millions of followers, watching them do the most insane things. My kids don't watch traditional TV, right? Mainstream channel 3, channel 2, channel 5, channel 7, channel 9. We're like, we would tell them we had to wait and sit in front of this box until 8 o'clock on a Friday to watch whatever the show was. You know, you guys just click there and like you mention one thing and they're on their phones saying, oh, that's from blah, 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 blah. And they want it now. So the idea that they're not so much disillusioned, I think it might be because they may be smarter than we are, right? And they're just kind of like the tools that they have available to them are much wider. And they're saying, if this big five's not going to take me, if these big traditional houses aren't going to take me as a marginalized whatever, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And when I already make it big, they're going to come to me. So then they don't need like the avenues for them to be what they would deem as being successful. There's more. And so you've got that generational gap where I'm older, like even having to learn Twitter, learn social media. I avoided it like the plague for the longest time. But my kids are Instagram savvy, right? They know how to use TikTok. They know how to use all of it. And so the age gap in that terms of access, there's so many different avenues in which you can think about it. So it's not, I think they're redefining how traditional can be claimed. And they don't put the same emphasis on it, perhaps. They're like, yes, there's still those big super success. I was 15 and they found me and I published it and I got $1 million or whatever it is. Like their ideals are a lot different. And that may come with being young and being naive, but they're not, they have different avenues. And I think the way they define that. So they're okay. Indie's not a bad word, right? It doesn't mean that you failed. They're like, that's just the route I'm going to go right now. And they can see it and identify it as a potential route. So, the way that the industry moves is not the same as it used to move 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, where we didn't have to. If you have the access, and if you don't, you're going to find a way to be able to get that access. And people, they're going to go and find the stories that they want to find on whatever platforms they are. So I think maybe because of that, if you continually get rejected by whatever traditional publishing is or by whatever these barriers are, you want to go and find your indie routes instead, because it's like, I know this story is important. I know these people are out there. I'm talking to the community and I just want it to be in the world, however it's going to be. And if it's, that time will come. So I think perhaps we move more towards the indie because it's a more welcoming environment. And why not be around people that are happy to see you instead of wanting to shape and mold you into what their vision of you is supposed to be. So, which traditional publishing can do.
And I will add one other thing, which I think is really interesting for indie pub specifically. And I think you touched on it, Patchree, with like TikTok or social media a lot. And I know that I've talked to a lot of writers as well. I've signed, I think, 2 now who are like, I have a platform. Like, I don't necessarily feel like I need like the PR aspect of going with a bigger publishing house. Like, I have a fan base, however you define that, who's like ready to pre-order my book like now. I don't think I necessarily need the big billboards, and I don't need the, however you want to define like success in traditional publishing. And so for some of the writers who are like, I'm ready to go, I just need help with editorial. I just need to get it shaped and it's ready. That is also, I think, where some writers are finding that they'd rather just go an indie route, get it out, not necessarily a little quicker, because indies, we're still
Yes, it's so
on the
slow.
same traditional publishing timeline as everything else in publishing moving so slowly, but there is sort of that immediacy and also the ability to publish a book without necessarily having a lit agent. I know I might be
Yeah.
in the non, majority, where I always tell my writers like, go find a literary, like, don't just come in and publish. I always talk to my writers about, go out, continue to query your next project. A lot of indies will sign projects, not necessarily full catalogs for writers. So I think that is something that's really important as well. You can have it all. Do it all.
To touch on something that you've said there, I actually think that something that we haven't really talked about much yet is that the social media aspect that you brought in, Patchree, is all about mobilizing communities. And those kids are way better at mobilizing communities than I, or probably anyone my age, will ever be using the internet, whether it is social media or some other aspect of that, and that connectivity. And I think that's part of why it's so hard for us to go back to that, is because they're digital natives in a way that we will not be digital natives. Technically, I think that the year I was born and like my lived experience makes me count as a digital native, but I'm like, y'all don't really understand what that is until you talk to one of these kids, because they are the true digital natives. I'm like a cusp baby or something. Like, I barely count, but they have that knowledge, that power. This is like breathing to them, whereas we have to learn it. We had to learn it, right? And I think that ability to mobilize communities is a big part of what is changing the face of publishing in the way you.
Okay, then. I think one thing Patchree said was about with querying and needing to disclose any marginalizations and whatnot, and then book after book after book, as Sal did. How can marginalized authors protect themselves while querying? I think Adil Keir had touched on this a little bit ago, but I just wanted to see if there's any suggestions on that for those who are going to go forth and query.
I feel like we've all kind of touched on it, but like, I feel like if you don't feel comfortable saying something, disclosing something, putting information out there, don't feel like you have to, right? Like, you're gonna find the people you need to in the industry. So be comfortable in what you're querying, be comfortable in what you're doing. Don't, there's a lot of weird power dynamics in this industry. I think, you're putting yourself out there in your work and letting it be sort of like poked and prodded at, and you don't also need to feel like that's happening to you as a writer yourself. So boundaries, I think, are really important. So disclose what you feel is comfortable, but don't feel like you have to. And don't feel, I guess I should say, don't feel like you have to in order to get somewhere. You'll find your way there.
I think in terms of being a marginalized author, or coming from an underrepresented community, I have to be willing to share. I'm only going to share as much as I'm comfortable with, and that's the way that I'm going to protect myself. So whenever I talk about things, I try to consider it. I think I felt like I did a lot of waiting, and it's like, do I really want to say this? Do I really want to expose this much of myself? And when I was okay with it and I felt like it was going to be received, then I became a little bit more comfortable with it. But if ever as a writer, on any part, during any part of the process, if you feel too vulnerable, I walk away from it. Like, it's not worth whatever that promised pot of gold is at the end, that is probably going to be a lot smaller than you actually think it is. Like, it's not worth it to put yourself or expose yourself more than you are willing to. So it's just like, I think I've had this in different panels or different conversations when you think of like social media, where you might see authors who are like, they're sharing everything. It's like, I'm going to take you into my house, and here's my space, and here's my dog and my cat and my kids, and we're all on this thing. And I have a very, I'm, I don't want to share too much. And when I do share, it's like, you got to make sure that you're okay with what you're going to share. And that the people that you're connected to are also okay with it. Because when we step into it, like, it's all fine and good to feel like, yes, I've got a huge traditional deal. But when you think of the issues and the other side of celebrity that come with it, if you're not ready for it as a writer, then that's another thing that, like, we all want to hit it big, but it's like, do you really want to hit it big? Because think of everything, there's a whole nother side to it that comes that you might not be ready for. So in terms of trying to protect yourself, you have to be honest with yourself as a writer and as an author. And when you go through it, and really be honest with your agent who's working with you, be honest with the publisher. Because there are things like when my publisher asks me stuff and I'm like, I don't know what that is, or I don't want to do that. My publishers, they have two different, well, now they have three imprints, but their main imprint is a Muslim imprint. And so there are things that I say or do, I'm their first signing for the non-Muslim press. And I tell them, they're like, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything we say. But there are rules and like your behavioral rules that you have to follow and codes of conduct. And a lot of it sounds pretty straightforward. It's like, dude, be a person and don't be a jerk when you walk around the world, and you're going to be fine. But you have to be honest with, what do you feel comfortable with doing? And if you're honest with it, then you're more likely to be well protected. And I think that's one of the reasons, of course, you should always have the agents, because your agents theoretically should help you when it comes to contract reading and interpretation time. They're the ones who are going to be able to protect you in that sense. And if you don't have the agent, for myself, it's finding another attorney who's willing to look at it, or reaching out to the community to see, what are the flags that I should be looking for, just to make sure that I am protecting myself, as much as I want to jump through the hoops and get the deal inked and all of that. You have to be honest with yourself through that process. And I think that's the best way to be able to protect yourself, through querying, feeling like your words aren't being stolen, and just trust that the process is going to protect you. It's a leap of faith.
I think I was thinking about it as in like from a mental health perspective, because when you're querying as a marginalized person, especially if you have a story that is representing some part of your identity that's very personal, it can be pretty rough to start getting a lot of rejections that kind of feel like well, I don't even understand what this is like, and it might, start to feel like personal. It never is, but sometimes it can. It's just worth to remember that like your voice is just really important. And some people will tell you like, oh, this isn't Asian enough, this isn't this enough or that enough. You get it from all sides as a marginalized author, especially also writing from diaspora. So it's just important to remember that your voice is important, and any kind of rejection shouldn't discourage you from like trying.
Yeah, I have a slightly different approach to this, probably because I'm an agent. But before I get into that, I want to say that I do like unequivocally agree with what everyone else has said about protecting themselves. But my addition to that would be, Patchree mentioned about becoming a public figure, being a celebrity after that book deal, right? You need to figure out who you are and who that person is and what is your brand image and who is your public identity and who is that public image. If you figure that out now, that will be armor moving forward. That will help protect you moving forward. You decide who that person that the public will see is, and that person can change. Like, I'm not saying that you lock that in today and, you know, that's who you are in 5 years, right? Because that person will change over time. But you need to always know who that person is and what your brand is or your public identity is all the time, because that's how you will remember these are not things I want to share because these are things that will make me feel unsafe, or these are things that will make me feel more vulnerable, right? So if you figure out what that is at the very beginning, you have already taken steps towards protecting yourself, and you would not believe how far those strides will take you in protecting you, not just after your book is published or when it's published, but before you even get to that point.
All right then. Sorry, felt like I was glowing like the sun, so I stepped out of frame to adjust that. Well then, I think that brings me to the last question before wrapping up. And we are getting very close to time. I think we might be a little longer, but it's a big panel, so this is fine. But you know, we're a group of authors, agent, editor. What ideas do we have for what steps the industry can take, such as agents, editors, and publishers, to open doors to marginalized communities and increase diversity? And I know Keir had said it starts with, there's, you know, beyond that, you know, political and structural or infrastructural issues that need to be addressed. So what can we put forth in this panel that hopefully other people in the industry can maybe take forward and go with?
I have one that I think a lot of the work from, let's say, like pitch contests or queries from marginalized writers end up on marginalized publishing professionals' plates. You know, I think both Keir and I have touched a little bit on, like, we're doing like personalized passes, or we are like giving feedback or pointing them to other directions. And I've heard from a lot of writers, you know, like, I will get a like from a non-marginalized agent or editor, and just they'll get ghosted, for example. Like, there's just like a no response or a rote pass. And so I think that is one thing that would be, I don't want to say easy because it is a lot of work, but, you know, give some feedback, do a little bit more work, like bring marginalized writers up with you and some insight into the publishing industry, so that way marginalized publishing professionals aren't the only ones doing it. That's one thing that I can think of right off the bat.
I feel like from a writer's and an author's perspective, if the industry was more transparent, that could make huge strides. Like, just be straightforward with me, right? You guys want me to do all this, and I understand there are a lot of pieces that, and a lot of people in positions that are involved in publishing a book, but the fact that the industry is so secretive, it makes it so we don't really know what we're doing wrong or what we are doing right. So in terms of, as a marginalized person and not being able to see behind the curtains, makes it feel that much more difficult. So if the industry is more transparent and, you know, agents are more open and saying, you know, sometimes we get angry at agents, but you guys are people too. Everybody's a person. You can only read so fast. You can only respond to so many things, and everybody is so quick to anger. But if we understand and try to be more empathetic and understand or see what's happening on the other side. That's one of the, I think, like for me personally, I enjoy being on the small press because I'm learning it. I'm learning the ropes as I go, and then I can start to build that comfort level to be able to share whatever that story is. And tell myself that, yes, somebody does actually want to hear it. It's not just me talking to myself. But if the industry feels a bit more transparent, and everybody is a bit more open about just what publishing is, and not feel like we're going to war all the time and everything is so secretive and under wraps, then the community can start to grow and be more supportive of each other, rather than looking at everybody else as your competitor. And, we're not in the Hunger Games. We don't have to kill everybody. We can still both thrive as, whatever genre you write in, there's room for everybody. So I think transparency is how I would suggest the doors open a little bit better.
I definitely want to agree with all of those points raised. I think transparency is also one of the places that I was leaning hardest. Like I just as an agent, I try to be super transparent with the people who are querying me. I'll send messages in my from my query manager to be like, hey, I haven't gotten back to you in a while, but I just want you to know like this is still being reviewed. I'll post about statistics on Twitter or wherever I can post about statistics so that people know like where I am in my inbox. And I also think that so much of it, we live, at least over here, we live in a capitalist society. And what that means is that people have to make money to earn a living. And because so much of writing and agenting, and even editing is unpaid, a lot of unpaid or underpaid labor, I'll be that person who says, pay folks more. Pay folks more. And when we're looking at some years ago there was Publishing Paid Me. And I think that we need to make changes so that all of those gaps that we saw in when Publishing Paid Me came out and that spreadsheet came out, those gaps need to be closed, right? We have also, we don't just need diversity on in agencies and on the editorial and acquisitions board. We need them in marketing. We need them in sales, right? We need them in publicity and, in all of those other places, right? So many of those books that are from marginalized voices that weren't paid well, right? Or weren't promoted well. The reason for that is because somebody was like, well, we don't know how to market this, but you bought it anyway. Which, you know what, I still prefer that, because at least it means it's on the shelf and somebody can get it. Like it's out there. And then so much of that too is that people are like, oh, well, this doesn't sell well. It's not selling well because you don't know how, like, who the people to market it to. Like, you don't know how to engage with this. You know what I mean? Like, so much of it is just is I don't know. And if they keep buying books from marginalized voices and paying very little for it and giving it very little promotion and marketing and publicity and everything, it's not going to go anywhere. And then they'll say, well, books by this demographic doesn't sell well. Does it not sell well, or do you not promote it? And and I think that is true. So I think that at all levels, it's about having more diversity on all levels, right? BIPOC of obviously, but also like neurodivergence and mental health and disability and like across the board, right? We need to not just have it, but acknowledge it. And then we also need and we also need to make sure that this is just at every level, and equity for when you're actually, like, what was it that they said in the court case, about $100,000 being a low level advance these days? It's nothing. It's such a small advance. I will start to use expletives, so I'm going to stop here. But they said that, right? Like we all remember that, don't we?
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's like, what? Who is getting this? Who is getting this 6-figure advance? Because I promise you, it's probably not a marginalized voice, right?
Or if it is a marginalized voice, they better earn out really quick and be amazing and have everything be the perfect Cinderella story in order to get a second book. No pressure.
Right?
Right.
Exactly. We have, and I think we've said this, someone said this earlier too, but we've always, as a marginalized voice, you're always held to a different and higher standard, right? Like always. And that's one of the things that we need to do, I think, to increase diversity and open doors, is that we need to give everybody the same standards. Like, I don't mind, right? You could do it either way. You could either bring up the other standards to where we have to be or lower ours. All right. I would love nothing more than to have to only meet the expectations of a mediocre white man. I would love nothing more than to only have to do that.
All right. Well, on that note, I'd like to go ahead and send everybody out where we can promote all our stuff. Not as mediocre white men. So go ahead and let all of those who have watched today's panel know where they can find you and if you have anything coming out. And then I'll do a little wrap up after that. So let's go ahead and start with Keir.
Sure. So you can usually find me on the website formerly known as Twitter. I'm not supposed to be there anymore, but yet I find myself opening the app far more than I ever should. But primarily, I am trying to make Instagram my main space. And my social media handle is @Keir Alekseii, which is just my name. So I don't know, take like a little screenshot of the spelling if you want, and just, you know, to find me on social media. If you would like to query me, I am only open to underrepresented and marginalized voices. I do take submissions, queries from BIPOC writers year round. And if I ask for a pitch of yours or I solicited your manuscript, I also accept that year round. At the time of this recording, I am closed to queries. But I do hope to be open for queries by the end of by the end of June or early July. And I look for science fiction, fantasy, horror, and young adult contemporary. So science fiction, fantasy, horror, adult and young adult, and contemporary young adult only. If you are interested in books, keep an eye out later this year. Hammerjang Luck will be on shelves. You are also likely to see in early 2025 The Serpent Called Mercy and The Keeper of Lonely Spirits. So, you know, keep your eyes peeled for those. All of those books are written by marginalized voices, and they all have BIPOC representation, queer representation, and just overall fun stuff.
All right, Lauren.
Yeah, so I am also like Keir and not supposed to be on X. I am updates only, but you'll see me lingering every once in a while there. I'm Lauren Gilmore 03 on X or Twitter. And everywhere else, I'm just Lauren T. Davila. So you can find me on Instagram, as well as I think I have Blue Sky and Hive and a couple other socials that were also floating around. I am also closed at the moment for subs at Inkton Gray. We're probably not going to be opening up till the end of the year for general submissions, but if you are interested in querying me specifically from the WriteHive conference, feel free to do so and just mention that you were, you know, attending the WriteHive conference, and feel free to send something my way. We are looking primarily right now for sci-fi, both YA and adult, and then also horror as well. So those are the two big things that we're looking for at the moment. We don't necessarily dabble too much into romance and contemporary, but if there's something you think might fit, feel free to send it my way. And then in terms of projects, I've got a couple more anthologies of my own coming out this year. And then a couple projects from writers that I have edited and acquired for Inked and Gray. So I have Carnelian, which is a new adult vampire, really fantastic rep for disability and chronic illness, as well as queer rep. And then we also have With Love Juniper, which is forthcoming as well. Cozy, witchy YA, very cute, very nice and cottagecore-y. So take a look for those two very different manuscripts that will be coming next year.
Okay, and Sal.
Hey, you can find me mostly on Instagram. It's Go Sal Go. I'm also on Twitter sometimes. It's just Sal Go on Twitter, and my website is salgowrites.com. The book, The Last Few Hunters, out now. It just came out last month, and the high concept is The Witcher meets Princess Mononoke in Southeast Asia. So there you go. Thank you so much.
And let's wrap up with Patchree.
You can find me. I tend to be on Twitter more than the other platforms, but on Twitter, my handle is Points Tangent, because I used it originally for business, and now writing is my business, so it's kind of shifted. But everywhere else, I'm Patchree Jones. You can find me. I've got TikTok, Instagram, I think Blue Sky, and my website is simply patchreejones.com. Skylight is my debut. I write middle grade fantasy, so if you want a simpler read, it's a Thai inspired middle grade fantasy coming out June 25th. So you can check it out, pre-order it, or find it through my site.
Wonderful. I'm gonna go look up all those books, all those anthologies. And if those of you who are watching this panel, if you want more content similar to this topic, you can check out Wordner Cafe, episode 66, Mental Health Strategies, Querying Anxiety, and Querying and R&R Tips from the 2023 WriteHive Conference. Again, thank you all for being here and joining me on this panel. And I look forward to seeing everyone on the actual panel weekend, and have a good one.